Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. This video is the next in our series, a survey of the Bible, and we're currently looking at the book of Deuteronomy. And this is our 11th video in our look at the book of Deuteronomy. We really are going into detail on this. We're doing a proper survey on it. So in this video, we're going to be looking at Deuteronomy chapters 22 to 24. Now, let's continue. The first institution that God established after he created Adam was the institution of marriage. God performed the first marriage when he brought Eve to Adam, and they became husband and wife. They established the first home. Now, because God feels that the home is so important, God gave many instructions to protect the home. We'll be looking at a number of those regulations today. We will learn what God said about a woman that was accused by her husband of being unfaithful before marriage. We'll also see what God told the people of Israel about divorce. So as we go through the video, we should be able to see what God said about the way we should show concern for other people and for animals. We should see what God said about a woman that was accused of being unfaithful. We'll see what God said about uncleanness, and we'll see what God said about divorce. So God wanted the people of Israel to learn to respect the rights of others. As a result, God said that when a man, for example, found the animal of another person, he was to return the animal to the owner. Now, if the owner lived a long way from the home of the man that found the animal, the finder was to keep the animal until the owner came for it. Then he was to return the animal to the owner. Anything else that belonged to another person was also to be returned to the owner. Now, if a person saw the animal of another person fall into a ditch, that person was to help the animal out of the ditch so that the animal would not die in the ditch. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 22 verses 1 to 12. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray, and hide yourself from them. You shall certainly bring them back to your brother. And if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it to your own house, and it shall remain with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him. You shall do the same with his donkey, and so you shall do with his garment, with any lost thing of your brother's which he has lost and you have found. You shall do likewise. You must not hide yourself. In other words, you must be open about it. You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down along the road and hide yourself from them. You shall surely help him lift them up again. A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God. If a bird's nest happens to be before you along the way, in any tree or on the ground, with young ones or eggs, with the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely let the mother go, and take the young for yourself, that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days. When you build a new house, then you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring guilt of bloodshed on your household if anyone falls from it. Now, of course, a house in those days had a flat roof, and people used to have stairways up to the flat roof. You shall not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seed, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. You shall not plough with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear a garment of different sorts, such as wool and linen, mixed together. You shall make tassels on the four corners of the clothing with which you cover yourself. We'll stop there. So, a woman was not to wear the clothing of a man, and a man was not to wear the clothing of a woman. Now, today, in our day and time, we have many people who wear the clothing, or at least the underclothing, of people of the opposite sex. We see that such things were already happening at the time that Israel entered into the land of promise. However, we see that the Lord told the people of Israel that they were not to follow the practices of other nations. Now, we've seen many times that they were to be a holy people set apart to the Lord. Now, as a result, they were not to wear the clothing of the opposite sex. God said that when people took the young or the eggs of a bird, they were to let the bird go free. God also told the people to build a wall around the sides of their flat roof so that no one would fall off the roof. Otherwise, the people would bring blood on their houses. So we also saw that animals were not to plow, different types of animals were not to plough together in a field. Why do you think God said that the people of Israel were not to wear the clothing of the opposite sex? Why do you think that God wanted the people of Israel to be different from the surrounding nations in so many different ways? So again, this is all about separation, and God gave many instructions about separation. The people were not to plant different kinds of seed in the same field. They were not to use two different kinds of animals to work together, because these animals would not be able to work together as a team. Now, God also told the people not to use different kinds of materials in the same piece of clothing. The people were told to make a blue fringe on the edge of their clothes. The blue fringe was to show that the people of Israel were a separate people who had been set apart to serve God. By keeping the people of Israel as a separate people, God was keeping them as a separate people so that the promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob about the one that would come from Israel could be fulfilled. And of course, the one was Jesus Christ himself. And all these rules were to do with holiness. The idea is to be set apart, to be different from the nations around them. And we as Christians today are supposed to be different from the society around us. So sometimes a man would marry a woman and later accuse her of not being a virgin when he had married her. Now, such an accusation would bring an evil name on the woman, even if the woman was innocent. Now, in order to protect a woman if she was innocent, the parents could bring the proof to the elders that their daughter was a virgin when she married the man. Then the elders were to take the man and beat him for trying to destroy the good name of his wife. Such a man was not allowed to divorce his wife as long as he lived. However, if the wife was guilty, then the wife was to be stoned to death, so that sin would not continue to remain in the land. And we'll see this in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 13 to 30, which is subtitled in my Bible, Laws of Sexual Morality. If a man takes a wife and goes into her and detests her and charges her with shameful conduct and brings a bad name on her and says, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found she was not a virgin, then the father and mother of the young woman shall take and bring out the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. And the young woman's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man as wife, and he detests her. Now he has charged her with shameful conduct, saying, I found your daughter was not a virgin, and yet these are the evidences of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city. Then the elders of that city shall take that man and punish him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought a bad name on a virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife. He cannot divorce her all his days. But if the thing is true, and evidences of virginity are not found for the young woman, then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death with stones, because she has done a disgraceful thing in Israel, to play the harlot in her father's house. So you shall put away the evil from among you. If a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them shall die, the man that lay with the woman and the woman. So you shall put away the evil from Israel. If a young woman who is a virgin is betrothed to a husband, and a man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. The young woman because she did not cry out in the city, and the man because he humbled his neighbour's wife. So you shall put away the evil from among you. But if a man finds a betrothed young woman in the countryside, and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lied with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. There is in the young woman no sin deserving of death. For just as when a man rises against his neighbour and kills him, even so is this matter. For he found her in the countryside, and the betrothed woman cried out, but there was no one to save her. If a man finds a young woman who is a virgin, who is not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then a man who lay with her shall give to the young woman's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has humbled her. He shall not be permitted to divorce her all his days. A man shall not take his father's wife, nor uncover his father's bed. Very interesting, don't you think, the seriousness of sexual practices or sexual misconduct. Why was that? Well, that was because God did not want the sinful practices of the Canaanites to be allowed to continue in the land when Israel received the land. Otherwise, the people of Israel would be encouraged to join in with the sins of the other nations. Now, God said that if a man was caught having a sexual relationship with a married woman, then both of them were to be put to death. Now, if a girl that was engaged had a man come and have sexual relationships with her while she was in a city, that is when there were people around, that's what that means, both the man and the woman were to be stoned to death. She was to be stoned because she had not called for help. Now, he was to be stoned because he had sexual relationships with a woman that was promised to another man. So God had said many times that there are to be no sexual relationships outside of marriage. The man was to be put to death because he was guilty of rape. The woman was not to be put to death because there was no one to help her out in the open field. This is the case of if a man forced a woman out in the countryside and she cried out and there was no one to help her. Not many people in the countryside. So if a man had sexual relationship with a virgin, he was required to pay 50 shekels to the father of the girl. Then the girl became his wife. Because of the sin of the man, he could never divorce the girl in the future. So the men were also warned that they were not to marry the wife of their father. Here we see that God gave the people of Israel a number of instructions about sexual relationships. So why do we think that a man could not divorce a virgin with whom he had had sexual relationships? You know, these verses tell us about the fact that God considers sexual sin a very serious sin. Why do we think that God said that a man that had sexual relationships with a woman before he married her was never allowed to divorce her? Interesting questions, don't you think? Particularly in our day and age when anything goes just about. So let's continue. God spoke of several people that were not to be part of the nation of Israel in its worship. First, God said that a man who did not have his sexual organs was not to join Israel in its worship. Then God said that a bastard was not to be included in their worship. Now, a bastard was a man that was born because of sexual relationships between a parent and a child, or a brother or a sister. That's basically incest. God also said that the people of Moab and Ammon were not to have any part in the worship of Israel because of their sin. Edom and Egypt had shown kindness to Israel in the past, and so God said that they could worship with Israel, beginning with the third generation of the people of those nations. Interesting that it was the third generation. Let's have a look at Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 1 to 25, and this is subtitled, well, this is the whole chapter actually, subtitled, Those Excluded from the Congregation. Okay, he who is emasculated by crushing or mutilation shall not enter the assembly of the Lord. One of illegitimate birth shall not enter the assembly of the Lord. That's an even more polite word than the word I used a minute ago. Even to the 10th generation, none of his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord. An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and water on the road when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you. Interesting story, Balaam the prophet. Nevertheless, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, but the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. You shall not seek their peace, nor their prosperity all your days forever. You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, because you were an alien in his land. The children of the third generation born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. Verse 9, subtitle, Cleanliness of the Campsite. When the army goes out against your enemies, then keep yourself from every wicked thing. If there is any man among you who becomes unclean by some occurrence in the night, then he shall go outside the camp. He shall not come inside the camp, but it shall be when evening comes that he shall wash with water, and when the sun sets, he may come into the camp. Also, you shall have a place outside the camp where you may go out, and you shall have an implement among your equipment, and when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it and turn and cover your refuse. For the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and give your enemies over to you. Therefore your camp shall be holy, that he may see no unclean thing among you and turn away from you. Very polite language there, actually. When you read that in detail, it's very interesting what that's talking about. Let's continue. Verse 15, subtitled Miscellaneous Laws. You shall not give back to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you. He may dwell with you in your midst in the place which he chooses, within one of your gates where it seems best to him. You shall not oppress him. There shall be no ritual harlot of the daughters of Israel, or a perverted one of the sons of Israel. You shall not bring the wages of a harlot or the price of a dog to the house of the Lord your God for any vowed offering, for both of these are an abomination to the Lord your God. You shall not charge interest to your brother, interest on money or food or anything that is lent at interest. To the foreigner you may charge interest, but to your brother you shall not charge interest, that the Lord your God may bless you in all to which you set your hand in the land which you are entering to possess. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin to you. But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be sin to you. That which has gone from your lips you shall keep and perform, for you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. When you come into your neighbour's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes at your pleasure, but you shall not put any in your container. When you come into your neighbour's standing grain, you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not use a sickle on your neighbour's standing grain. Interesting. So, when the men of Israel went out to fight against another nation, they were to remember that they were the people of God. They were to avoid all evil temptations that might come to them as they were on the battlefield. Now, while they were on the battlefield, they were to obey the same laws about cleansing that they obeyed when they were at home. A man that was unclean was to stay outside the camp until evening. Then he could come into the camp after he had washed himself. Now, the people were also to use a shovel that came to cover the waste that came from their bodies. You know what I'm talking about here. So the people of Israel were to keep the Lord in the center of their lives at all times, just as we should do today. A servant that escaped from a master in another country was to be allowed to live in the land of Israel. He was not to be returned to his master. The people of Israel were not to allow their daughters or their sons to become religious prostitutes. The money that had been paid to a harlot or a sodomite was never to be brought to the tabernacle. Such money was evil in the sight of God. God also said that the people of Israel were not to charge interest to the other people of Israel. They could only collect interest from a foreigner. Interesting, don't you think? Very interesting financial system they had there. So, God wanted his people to keep their word. If the people made a promise to God, they were to keep that promise, or it would be a sin in the sight of God. God said that it was better not to make a vow than to make a vow and break it. So if the people promised to give a certain offering to the Lord, they were to make sure that they gave that offering to the Lord. The people were also allowed to eat fruit from the fields of their neighbours as they walked through the fields. However, they were not allowed to take any fruit other than what they ate as they walked through the field. They weren't allowed to take a container. That would be very greedy, and it would be incredibly bad manners as well. Let's continue. Okay, because of the hardness of the hearts of the people, God did allow a man to divorce his wife. However, this was only allowed if he found some uncleanness in her. If a man did divorce his wife, he was to give his wife a letter of divorce. Then she was free to go and marry another man. Now, once a woman married another man, God said that she was never allowed to marry the first husband again, even if her second husband died or divorced her. God said that such a marriage would cause the land to be filled with sin, and God wanted his people to be a holy people. So in the next chapter, chapter 24, we'll see how long a man was to wait after he married a wife before he went to war, before he went off to the battlefield. And we'll look at what God says about divorce, and we'll see why God didn't allow a woman to be remarried to her first husband if she had married another husband and that second husband had died. So let's look at chapter 24, and this is subtitled Laws Concerning Divorce. So let's continue, verse 1. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that he finds no favor in her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. When she has departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies, who took her as his wife, then her former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord, and ye shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. Let's continue. When a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war or be charged with any business. He shall be free at home for 1 year and bring happiness to his wife whom he has taken. No man shall take the lower or the upper millstone in a pledge, for he takes one's living in a pledge. If a man is found kidnapping any of his brethren of the children of Israel, and mistreats him or sells him, then that kidnapper shall die, and ye shall put away the evil from among you. Take heed in an outbreak of leprosy that you carefully observe and do according to all that the priests, the Levites, shall teach you, just as I commanded them. So you shall be careful to do. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way when he came out of Egypt. When you lend your brother anything, you shall not go into his house to get his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you lend shall bring the pledge out to you. And if the man is poor, you shall not keep his pledge overnight. You shall in any case return the pledge to him again when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his own garment and bless you, and it shall be righteousness to you before the Lord your God. You shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, whether one of your brethren or one of the aliens who is in your land within your gates. Every day you shall give him his wages, and not let the sun go down on it, for he is poor and has set his heart on it, lest he cry out against you to the Lord, and it be sin to you. Fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor shall children be put to death for their fathers. A person shall be put to death for his own sin. You shall not pervert justice due the stranger or the fatherless, nor take a widow's garment as a pledge, but you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in your field, and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the branches again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterwards. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this thing. So God wanted a man and his new wife to have a year together before this togetherness was interrupted by war or by business. This was to allow time for their love and understanding of each other to grow and develop. The men of Israel were not to charge interest, but they could keep something as a pledge that the person would repay. However, they were not to keep as a pledge anything that a man needed to earn a living with, such as a millstone. Now, a man that stole other people and sold them as slaves was to be put to death. The people were also warned to follow all the instructions about leprosy. Otherwise, the disease might spread from that person to many other people. So God gave also several instructions to protect the poor. Now, a man was to wait outside a house to receive a pledge. He was not to go into the house and get the pledge for himself. The pledge of a poor man was to be returned before evening, and the people were also warned not to be cruel to a servant. A servant was to receive his wages when he requested them, because he was poor and needed the money for food. God also said that a father was not to die for the sins of his children. In the same way, a child was not to die for the sins of his father. Everyone was to be responsible for their own sin. So God also provided for those families where the husband had died. No one was to take advantage of the wife or the children. The Lord said that he would punish any people who took advantage of the needy, just as he had punished Egypt for taking advantage of Israel. So when the people harvested their fields, they were to allow some to remain in the fields for the needy. They were also to leave any olives on the tree that they did not get the first time, so that the poor could gather these olives. They were also instructed to leave a few grapes in their vineyards. It was the poor, the fatherless, and the widows, the needy people. It shows that God has a great concern for the fatherless and the widows. And it's important in our own lives that we help and encourage the widows that we know and the children whose fathers have died that we know as well. God cares about these people, and so should we. I want to thank you for joining me in this video. See you on the next one.